Hello, and welcome to another episode of History with a Drag Queen, starring me, Karla Marx. Hi, how are we doing? Episode 8 here, everybody. Whoa! And today, we are going to break Godwin's Law. That's right, I've been on the internet long enough. We're going to talk about Nazis. What? Okay, so I'm a German historian by trade. I dabble in a whole whack of different topics, but the one that I always get asked about is the Nazis. It's really cute when you're at like a family gathering or you're getting introduced to a new friend circle. There's always one person that's going to find me and come over and ask really intense questions about Hitler, which is an odd way to spend your Saturday nights, but it's an occupational hazard of mine. So let's do it. We're going to talk about how the Nazis came to power. So I'm going to be talking about just the last couple of years before the Nazis came to power, but kind of broadly as well, a little bit of like some of the broader trends and things like that that helped them come to power. So here we go. Why did the Nazis come to power? Well, the first explanation for this is usually that the Treaty of Versailles ended the First World War. The Germans felt really hard done by, and they were like, we hate the Treaty of Versailles. And the Nazis were like, hey, shit, everyone hates the Treaty of Versailles. We should hate it too. And they were like, yeah, you hate the Treaty of Versailles? Go be in power, Hitler. Wow, is that way too simplistic? Okay, it's just not the case. Everybody in Germany hated the Treaty of Versailles. The Social Democrats, the guys who signed the Treaty of Versailles, hated the Treaty of Versailles. Okay, everyone and their grandma was like, the Fighting League for Grandmas against the Treaty of Versailles. Try icing that onto a cupcake. It's not easy. They did it. So really, how significant was it for the Nazis? Well, it helped them, but it didn't make them unique by any standpoint because there were so many opponents to it, including, as I said, the guys who signed it. Okay, so if that's not it, unemployment. The Great Depression hits in 1929. The stock exchange collapsed in New York. It has this ripple effect across the globe. Unemployment in Germany is a big deal. 1 out of every 3 workers is unemployed, and this lasts for years. It starts in late 1929, but by 1933, in Berlin alone, 600,000 people were unemployed. In one winter, about 5 million people were unemployed. By 1932, unemployed individuals in Germany reached about 13 million, and many of these people have been unemployed for years. And so by this point, people were looking for kind of more radical solutions. What the government had been trying, basically what we would now consider austerity politics, had not worked. It wasn't working. The government were like, well, we keep cutting expenses, but the budget won't balance. And some economists were like, because maybe you need to spend some money to like get the economy going. Okay, well, after a couple of years of this intense, budgetary failure by the government, did everyone just say, well, we're going to try something new, let's vote for the Nazis? Sort of, but not entirely. You're going to get used to the historian answer where we don't ever say yes or no. We're like, sort of. So the answer is, did unemployment cause the Nazis to come to power? Sort of. So what actually happens is we see a polarization of political life in Germany because of the Great Depression and unemployment. So not only did a lot of people move towards the Nazis and say, give me some of that sweet swastika life, which is gross to even say. But a lot of people also went to the very far extreme on the other perspective and voted for socialists and communists. And so what we see is the middle class gets really eroded after years of unemployment and economic hardships. Their standing is very precarious, and they start looking for new solutions because they say, well, the original solutions that we've come up with, they're not really getting it done, so let's try something new. So not just the Nazis pick up votes, but we see kind of a split from the center to both wings of the political spectrum. So unemployment is very important, but it doesn't do it on its own. So there's other factors to consider as well. Another one is that the Nazis get really good at fighting. And the elections in Germany in the early 1930s are really noted by political violence. So did the Nazis just beat their way to the victory? No, they did not. But that was an important part of why they won elections, because what they would do is they used violence not to actually like achieve a political goal. The point of the violence was violence, to show that they were violent. And why did they want to do this? Because a lot of people were very afraid of communism. The Russian Revolution in 1917 was this massive dislocation of order and society and economics and politics. And a lot of Germans were really afraid of something violent like that happening here. So the Nazis actually pick up supporters by demonstrating that they also are violent, but that they would use violence to fight communism. So the goal wasn't to actually really kill that many communists, and actually not that many really died in years of warfare. If you compare it to like the First World War, it's minuscule. But the point of the violence was a demonstration of the willingness to use it to defend what they felt was important. And this picks them up a lot of voters on the right wing who say we need to stop communism at all costs, and the Nazis are the only one who have the strength to do that. It proves to be a very, very persuasive argument. So during the elections, they have what they call political combat leagues. Theirs was, the Nazis was called the Sturmabteilung, or Storm Division, stormtroopers. And they would literally just go around and beat people up. That was their job, and they really liked it. So they weren't really trying to kill a lot of people. They were using violence as a political tool to demonstrate their strength and virility. So in 1930, the Nazis kind of become a real national party. They pick up a ton of votes. They grow to kind of about 13% of the vote. They're kind of a significant power in German politics. After a couple of years of campaigning, of more violence, of kind of haranguing the ruling parties, in 1932 is when everything really changes. In 1932, we see a couple of things happen. One, there's a spring election for the presidency. Who's going to rule the country as president? The president has a ton of powers. He's basically like a substitute emperor, Kaiser, like he was before the war. And so the Nazis run for this. Hitler runs for this office, and he loses, but he doesn't lose by much. And instead, it kind of makes him look like a more respectable figure. And kind of people get a chance to try on Hitler for a size, which is really, wow, I'm saying some gross things today, but hey, here we are. It's the topic, right? So yeah, Hitler is kind of looked at as, well, maybe he's a national leader. And we see a huge coalition of right-wing supporters backing Hitler. And then what's really weird is that like this super old, like he's 84, this super old Prussian field marshal who's about as conservative as you get, he's like, I'll keep running for president. I like this job. And so the left wing's like, we have no good candidates. So they vote the old general into office to block Hitler, which they're like, see, we stopped Hitler from becoming president. We're doing a good job. And it's like, that's going to come back to bite you in the butt. So Hitler loses the presidency in 1932, but people start looking at him as more serious political player. So there's a July election, and that's when the Nazis become the largest party in the Reichstag, the German parliament. So that happens in July 1932. And this is a number that I really want you to remember. And if there's only one thing that you remember from this episode, it is that Karla is beautiful. If there are two things you remember, it is that the Nazis win their highest total in July 1932, 37.4%. Why is that super significant? That's the best they ever do. They never get more votes than that. So when somebody says, well, the Germans voted the Nazis into power, nuh-uh, sure didn't. There was never a majority of Germans that said, I like these guys. Okay, under free and open democratic elections, it didn't happen. Support changes and grows and evolves during the Third Reich as time goes on, but before this, there isn't a majority of Germans that ever elect Hitler into power. So Hitler was not elected to power. Okay, Karla. Well, then how did he get into power? I'm glad I asked myself that. Okay, so here's the tea. There's another election. I know. In November 1932. And this one's a doozy. Why is there another election? Because Hitler refuses to share power. So he's the biggest party in July 1932. And the government's like, the president, Hindenburg is like, okay, you want to be the government? And he's like, nope. Well, what are you going to do then? He's like, I'm going to oppose the government. Like, you're the biggest party. You should be a part of the cabinet and run the country. And he's like, unless I get all power, I'm doing nothing. Sounds mature. And so he refuses to share power unless he gets everything. So he sits in opposition to the government, kind of just like is a dick to them, and eventually causes a crisis, and they need to do another election in November. This was a mistake because the Nazis lose 2 million votes. They lose a bunch of seats in the Reichstag. They're still the biggest party, but they've lost their prestige because up until this point, the Nazis had only ever grown in popularity. This is the first time that they lose a little bit of popularity, and it causes the Nazis to freak the fuck out. Yeah. And so what does this mean? Well, nobody really knows. Hitler stands by and says, I'm still doing my everything or nothing policy, which sounds like me ordering skip the dishes, but it's not. And he says, I want to be chancellor, I want to be in charge of the government, or no Nazi is going to support the government. Okay, so the government kind of limps on a little bit under a really weird guy. He's a former general. His name is Kurt von Schleicher. Schleicher is a little delusional by this point, and he's a schemer. He's always got plans. He's always like, I'm going to get this guy to do this thing, and I'll combine them together and make a new government. And it's worked for about 3-4 years until this point, but now he's dealing with Hitler, and it doesn't really work. So what he plans to do, he's like, you know what? I, too, hate communists. I don't like the way Hitler's running his party. He's too aggressive. He's too violent. I like the Nazis, I don't like Hitler. So he comes up with a plan to split the Nazi party in two, merge that with a bunch of working class guys, and call it the cross-front conception. And everyone's like, this is never gonna work. He's like, oh, watch me. Turns out they were right. He was so wrong. Oh, wow. Of all the wrong people, he was one of them. And so he tries to create, split the Nazi party. He actually finds a Nazi who's like, yeah, I can do that. And so him and this other guy, Strasser, Georg Strasser, sorry. They get together and like, we're going to split the Nazi party, merge it into the government. We're going to be the super best friends club. It's going to be great. Turns out Strasser's an idiot. And he announces at a meeting in Munich to like a whole huge ton of Nazis. He's like, I'm going to violate Hitler's orders. I'm going to join the government. Y'all should come with me. He doesn't even make it out of the city before the Nazis are like, dude, we got to kill you. So they kind of smuggle him off, and he's under house arrest, and a couple of years later, they kill him. But in the meantime, Schleicher's like, cool, you're going to show up? Where's my buddy? Because they never communicated with each other very well, and, like, Strasser wasn't like, yeah, I'm going to revolt now and join you. And Schleicher was like, okay, do it. They didn't have that conversation. So Schleicher's just, like, waiting around in Berlin for a guy who's not showing up because he's super arrested. Hitler, by this point, has figured out, this guy in charge of the government, Schleicher, he's not going to work for me. So what happens? Well, it's definitely not Germany's best friends race because Schleicher's former best friend and former chancellor, Franz von Papen, he got jilted. Papen fired him. He fired his former best friend. These guys had been together since they were like 14. They were super tight. Schleicher betrays him, and Papen is over in the office, and he's crying his little, Catholic eyes out, and he says, I want to be back in power. Well, guess how that happens? Hitler, Papen, I love you more. Me, Nazi kissing. Yeah. They made little baby Nazis. Well, okay, they couldn't, but if they could have, they would have. So Papen and Hitler get together, they form an alliance, and what happens is that Papen convinces the president, Hindenburg, to transfer power to Hitler to stop communism. And that's it. That's how it happens. There's a backdoor deal, and Hitler becomes president because a bunch of guys were afraid of communists. And that's what the argument that they use to convince people that it's okay. Now, a couple of key things to note about this. One, Hitler is not elected to power, as we said. He never receives a majority in the parliament. He's the largest party, but only for a couple of months, and he never actually wins an outright majority. He's not elected into power. So was this illegal, all these backdoor deals? Heck no. German constitution clearly outlines that you can do this, and it's kind of wild, and now constitutions like, don't do this. But in that day, in 1932, 1933, yeah, it was super illegal for the president to appoint a chancellor that he wanted to work with. So Hitler comes to power through totally legal means. They're shitty, but they're totally legal. And there you go. It's a backdoor deal. He's not elected. He's legally appointed. Afterwards, the Nazis make a big hoopla of this, and they're like, it was a seizure of power. And they talk about like Hitler taking power because he was the right guy for it. It's a load of balooey. He got legally appointed because a bunch of people got afraid of communists. Okay, so this has been episode 8 of History with a Drag Queen. I'm Karla Marx. If you have it within you to financially tip, I very much appreciate it. If not, just enjoy the show. It's great. Thanks again to Martin Jones for supporting this podcast. It's been really lovely. And honestly, I love doing this. The feedback has been so good. So please like, subscribe, share, comment, anything you can do to help me get the word out. I really appreciate it. And as always, I'm open to any topics you might want me to cover. And until next time, have a lovely day.